Arendal reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to review some speakers. The first ones they offered up were their very affordable ones. Can't remember the exact model number. Anyway, they sent them over and they promptly discontinued that speaker. But they asked me if I wanted to review the 1723s, and I have been going a little bit more expensive on speakers. Why? Well, after a while you kind of run out of cheap speakers, but I am going to be buying more cheap speakers. These come in around $1,600 and they're built like tanks. Let's talk about some specs. So Arendal has a variety of speakers. The 1723 THX speakers are, well, THX certified. I did a little bit of research. THX, if you remember, was actually created from George Lucas's Lucasfilm company, and it was a way to standardize on kind of what the director, what the producers wanted the movie to sound like. I don't know how much weight that actually carries today, and if anything, I think it might be a bit of a tax on audio speakers to pay the licensing fee to get the THX certification. But with that certification, you can kind of guarantee that the speakers are not going to have any type of crazy pops, troughs, or anything else that's going to diverge greatly from a flat frequency response. And that's pretty much what I heard with these speakers. I think with the THX certification and the type of speakers that they make, they're kind of a home theater speaker company. The 1961s were the one that they sent me, but they are out of stock, and I think they came in under $1,000. 1723S come in at $1,600 a pair, but the expected retail is $3,200. It's a direct-to-customer company, so they can say whatever it is. They could say $10,000 a pair retail, but they're only $1,600 right now. I will say at $1,600, though, they're built incredibly well. You can get a center, you can get a tower, you can get a monitor. One of these is also vented or ported. I think the monitor is ported. And then you can get some height speakers as well. Their website says if you have a smaller room, then you can use these. I didn't find that to be the case. I have a huge living room, and these had no problem filling the living room with sound. Well into the 80s, 85 dB and higher. And that is about as loud as I want to listen to things. They do have a 60-day in-home audition period and a 10-year warranty for what that's worth. 100% risk-free. I don't know how they handle like shipping back because they are not based in the US. They do give you a frequency response graph, and it looks like things are pretty flat out to 10,000 where there is a bump. We'll come back to that later. And they start to roll off around 100 hertz. Their negative 6 dB roll-off point on the bottom, I think, is 65 hertz. Yeah, it says the frequency response is 65 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. 6.5-inch woofer, 4 ohm nominal impedance with a sensitivity of 84 dB. I had these hooked up to the RMC1L from Emotiva, as well as the XPA Gen 3, which puts out plenty of power and current. For the source, I had the Weem Pro going into a Jashali Labs J2 AKM 4499 version with the Sparkos op amp upgrade connected to a linear power supply. That's right, I was throwing the kitchen sink at these things because they're $1,600. I figured they should have a good source. I figured they should have a good amp. I figured they should have a good preamp. Beautifully constructed. Not a wood finish. This is just a painted finish. A little bit of an angle at the front baffle. The speaker binding posts are beautiful. There's a little plate on the back. Has a keyhole hanger as well as threaded posts in the back to connect this directly to a wall if you want to. And I would say that this is definitely one of the best finished speakers, constructed speakers that I've ever had my hands on. I mean, this thing really sets the bar for a speaker. I don't think I've ever had a speaker that's built as well as these. Huge waveguide on the tweeter, 28 millimeters, which I assume is around 1 inch. Doesn't give the material for the tweeter, but to me it looks like a soft dome tweeter, maybe a silk dome tweeter. Big surround on the woofer, crosses over 1500 hertz, which is pretty good. The lower you can cross over a tweeter, usually, I could be speaking right out of my rear end at this point, but the lower you can cross over a tweeter, usually the more cohesive a speaker sounds. To me, and the quicker the mid-range can be. However, we'll get more into that when we talk about the sound. Let's talk about how they sound. Bass. Okay, let's do a little disclaimer. This is a sealed enclosure, okay? So there's not going to be a huge amount of bass extension. These are rated at 65 hertz, and that's a -6 dB low frequency roll off. And if you look at their own measurements, you can see that these start to roll off around 100 hertz. The good news is most bass is actually higher than 100. Occasionally you'll hear some stuff 70, 80. Now, if you have instruments and things like that, like non-rock and roll stuff that I don't really listen to, yes, it will go down there. Pipe organs, all sorts of things. Even acoustic guitars go way down. But I think most people would be surprised just how high the bass is that they're listening to. Ride the Lightning from Metallica was actually pretty punchy. Iron Man, Black Sabbath, the bass drum at the beginning comes out of the right speaker. Was amazing. Was amazingly clear, amazingly realistic. It's actually a very well recorded song. It really felt like it was in the room. And that came in at 250 hertz. I was using a real-time analyzer from THX, which is a great free app. And I would actually pay for it, except it's like $30 a month. It's really crazy. Killing Strangers, Marilyn Manson. At the beginning of that song, the bass comes in around 100 to 140 hertz and was also quite punchy. Felt like a bigger speaker. So, if you're not going to use a subwoofer and you listen to music that's very pedestrian, such as myself, I don't think you're going to be missing a lot. Narcissistic Cannibal by Korn, it could not handle the 1 minute mark. However, with a sealed enclosure, you get a more linear roll off on the bottom end, so it doesn't just drop right off. If you want a full range speaker, this isn't going to be the one for you. If you have a subwoofer though, I think you could really blend it in perfectly with the 1723s. Let's talk about mid range. Oh, whoops. Maybe I should stop recording my screen. I'm gonna have like 20 minutes of screen recording that I'm not gonna use. Mid-range, 337 mark on Ride the Lightning. The guitar solo got a little intense, and that was at 2800 to 3000 hertz. Was listening about 75 to 85 dB. Above 80 dB, it was a little bit harsh in your face. But I'm not saying that's a problem with the speaker. I think it's a problem with me. I have a high sensitivity in the upper mid-range, but it got a little bit intense. Patience by Chris Cornell. At the 28-second mark, when he's moving his hands across the strings of the acoustic guitars, it was a little bit... Again, a little bit intense. His vocals were also on the cooler side. And when I say cooler, I mean not as rich, baritone-y, bassy. Cooler. Not warmer, cooler. To check this, I played God's Gonna Cut You Down by Johnny Cash because his vocals, Johnny Cash's vocals, are very robust, very baritone-y. And again, his vocals, a little bit cooler. Let's talk about treble. Treble, Santa Monica by Everclear, the re-recorded version, which is really, really good. There is some relentless cymbals at the 1 minute and beyond mark. The speaker actually handled it very well. I was a little concerned about this speaker for the treble because it seemed a little dry, and we'll get more into that in the final thoughts, but it actually handled the cymbals really, really well. And what I'm looking for, what I'm listening for on that song at the 1 minute mark is differences in the cymbal crashes, because on a speaker that doesn't handle treble really, really well, they all just sound the same. It almost sounds like white noise piped in at the right frequency at the right time. Doesn't seem organic, doesn't seem like a real speaker. It sounds okay, but if you really lean into it and listen on a good speaker, you'll actually hear different impacts on the cymbal as he's playing, so it doesn't all sound the same. Now, I had to lean into it to hear it, but I definitely did hear a difference in the attack and the strike on the cymbal. So, treble on these is quite good. King of Pain by Alanis Morissette off the MTV Unplugged record is a sibilance experience. However, Arendal's actually handled it really well, which tells me the top end, the treble here, is super flat. And that's what a lot of people want in a speaker, is a very flat frequency response. On initial listen, I didn't think treble was going to be that great, but once I started doing the evaluation, the treble is actually one of the better parts of the speaker. What are my final thoughts? Bass is clean, tight, quick, obviously from a sealed enclosure. You'd hope that it would be quick. Treble, very good, very organic. Mid-range, a little bit too flat for me. I would say this is kind of a mid-range forward speaker. Although the bass is really good, and with a low frequency roll-off of 65 Hertz at a -6 dB, you wouldn't think the bass would be all that great, but this is quite punchy. And at 84 dB, what they probably did is squish things down really, really well so that the tweeter level could meet up with that woofer level, and you could get that really flat frequency response. And I think this is a very flat frequency response. For me personally, I like a little bit of excitement in my speakers. I like a little bit of a trough in that mid-range, especially at 2800 Hertz or the upper mid-range. Now, you can easily get that with a little bit of EQ, and I did that with the Weem. Brought down 2800 Hertz a little bit. Also boosted 300 Hertz a little bit, which brought a little bit more baritone, a little bit more richness into the vocals. Other than that, though, I thought it sounded great. I wish there was a little bit more air and extension around 10K and beyond, but that's probably just because of my hearing. This reminded me a bit of the KEF LS50 with much better bass, way better bass. This also reminded me of the ELAC Unify 2.0 initially. Very flat, but eventually that speaker really opened up, and I really enjoyed the ELAC Unify 2.0. Also reminded me a little bit of the ELAC Unify reference speaker. I think the reference and the 2.0 have a lot better bass punch and a little bit better bass extension, which makes sense because it's ported, but the Arendal is definitely not embarrassed at all on the bottom end. I think these are built like a tank, one of the best finished speakers, one of the best put together speakers I've ever seen. It is gorgeous. And if you're looking for a reference type of speaker, I don't think you can go wrong with 1723s. Excellent. Also takes very well to EQ, so if you do want to jazz things up, you certainly can. On the RMC1L, there is a loudness button that you can engage, but you can't engage that when you're playing direct stereo, and you can't engage it when you're playing reference stereo. So when I switch this around a little bit to all channel stereo, and I just disconnected the center speaker, and I hit the loudness button, transform these speakers. Fun, engaging, not saying they're not fun already, but really engaging. Gave me everything I wanted. At lower levels, this may seem a little bit too well behaved for some. Around 80 dB, they start to come to life a little bit, but I still think that that flat mid-range is too flat. I wish it was a little bit lower to accentuate the highs and accentuate the lows a little bit. Still a great speaker. Very, very good speaker. But it's a just the facts, ma'am speaker. You're going to hear bad recordings through this. One of the interesting things about this speaker was it really liked certain recordings. And it loved King of Pain by Alanis Morissette, Santa Monica by Everclear. However, Patience, the Chris Cornell cover, wasn't very good. And Ride the Lightning, Metallica, wasn't very good. I think if you're going to spend this money and you want something a little bit more exciting, maybe a little bit less reference, I think the SVS Ultra would be a very good alternative to this speaker. Built very, very well. Doesn't have some of the finer details like the very beautiful magnetic grills that the Arendals have, but the Ultra is a little bit more my speed. Still great speaker. Fantastic speaker. Reference speaker, though. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon. Patreon.com/cheapaudioman. Every Sunday night, we have Patreon-only Zooms, Patreon-only Discord. You can use the links in the description. However, this is not an affiliate link. I'm not affiliated with Arendal at all. Other links, Amazon links, Emotiva links, the other stuff is affiliated, which means if you click and you buy, I get a commission. Doesn't cost you any more, so it's a great way to support the channel. You can also buy me a cup of coffee. Down at the bottom of the video, there's a thanks button. Click on it, throw me a couple of bucks, but don't feel compelled to buy me anything. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu if you want everything as the director intended it. Get yourself a pair of Arendal 1723 THX certified speakers and fill your soul with happiness. So with that, I'm Randy. I'm a cheap audio man.